The longer your project roadmaps, the longer your project portfolio, the less flexibility you have to innovate and experiment. I got 5 or 6 calls from irate managers. You're telling my people they can't talk to me? And I said, yes, because you're interrupting them. You're not allowing them to finish the work that you brought me in here to do.
Don't follow the framework because you just want to follow the frame. Do it because it helps you build new habits.
I believe in practical ways to lead and serve others. It's not so much that managers have no place, because managers create the environment, the culture in which people can do their best work.
So ultimately, building the right product for the customer, creating the right business model for our company, seeking the right vision as an organization, all of those things, that's effectiveness.
If you really want to manage the project portfolio, you need to commit to a team, not a group of individuals. And you commit one project to a team at a time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Agile Insights conversation. Today, I'm hosting Johanna Rothman, and I'm super excited. We have never met before. We just had a brief chat before this conversation got started. So let's see where this takes us. Johanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, and I am delighted to be here.
Yeah. And Johanna, what I usually do is when I start these conversations, I let the guests introduce themselves. Obviously, I've done some research, and you were also kind enough to share with me some of the work that you've done to help me prepare for this session. But anyways, I'd like to give you the stage for a brief introduction about what you've done so far, because keep in mind, most of our viewers have probably not met you before either and are interested to hear or learn who they are going to learn from today.
Okay, so people know me as the Pragmatic Manager, because I focus on managing product development, from management, product development, all the expertise that goes around how we identify and release products that really work for us, for our customers, probably our customers first, but to make sure that they fit the strategy. It's everything around product development. So I've been doing this kind of work, I guess my entire career, but as a consultant for almost 30 years. So I have a lot of varied experience, which I find, so this is what's interesting about my previous inside organizational experience. I had very deep experience inside organizations. And what I have discovered is that while every organization is unique, there are some patterns and anti-patterns. I can support people as they want to figure out how to be more effective. So I'm an agilist because it's more effective, but I'm not an agilist for agile's sake.
Yeah. Yeah, this is good. Now, Johanna, you mentioned you've been a consultant now for 30 years. And before that, you worked within organizations, all in the realm of product development. Now, let me ask a bit, what kind of industries did you work in? Was it mainly software related, or did you also do work outside of the realm of software development?
So I will have to say high-tech product development, because I am, for anybody who watches this is not blonde hair, this is white hair, right? I have gray hair to show my experience. And when I started as a software engineer back in 1977, I worked on a telephone system for the Department of Defense that was software, hardware, firmware. We integrated other people's products into our product. So yes, it was all, and I had many, many more integrated product experiences in the first, I guess, almost decade of my career. Yeah. Remember, I started before mini computers started.
I was just going to go there. So, 1977, Joanna, what were the computers that you wrote or basically engineered software on? Was that still punch card, or did you already have like?
When I was in school, I had a real time operating system, but my very first job was still using punch cards with punch card ladies, where we would write out our code on sheets and give them to the punch card ladies who would type up our cards. Yeah, finally, about I guess 6 months in, they had they had teletype machines, so I could actually type my code in, and it would get saved, not as a punch card. I do not want to go back to those old bad days. Those were terrible. Everything took forever. But at the time, I was working in assembly language on what was called a Lytton 3050, which was a hardened IBM 360.
So 1977. I'm right now. So next week I'm going to speak to Jim Highsmith about his latest book, Wild
Yeah.
West to Agile, and I mean, it's basically a history of software engineering. And
Yeah.
it's so interesting that you brought this up because before I read Jim's book and now talking to you, my dad also is like one of those very first software engineers. So when he went to university in the 1970s, back then in Iran, he was also working on punch cards. And when he later, during his career, got to know like agile ways of working, he was like, yeah, of course it makes sense to do this. And back then, we couldn't do this because I only had 2 hours a week at the machine, right? All the other time, I had to do this planning and right, all of that. Then 2 hours, you get in there, and you know what? Sometimes when there was a mistake, you didn't even know on which punch card that mistake was. So you had to go through all of them again. And obviously, things have changed. Most developers have more than one machine at their disposal and 24/7. So things can be done differently. But in today's conversation, although it would be super interesting, I don't want to go into the history of software engineering because you mentioned earlier you focusing on this topic of pragmatic management, which is making product development like end to end more effective. And I love the fact that you use the term effective and not efficient, because that would be going into a lot of like these manufacturing things. But effectiveness is ultimately, I like one of those. I think it comes from Peter Drucker, doing the right thing, right? So
Mhm.
ultimately building the right product for the customer, creating the right business model for our company, seeking the right vision as an organization. All of those things, that's effectiveness. Now help me understand, you use the term specifically pragmatic management and not agile leadership or any of the other terms that are currently hyped. And I mean, I teach agile leadership courses. Now I'm interested in learning, what does pragmatic management mean to you?
So it's certainly not theory X management, right? But theory Y management, which says we believe that people are creative and creative in their work if we release them to do the right thing, right? We make it easy for them to do the right thing and more difficult for them to do the wrong thing. We also believe as pragmatic managers who want to be effective that flow efficiency, where we work as a collaborative team all the way up and down the organization, that flow efficiency thinking is more effective than resource efficiency thinking. We
Mhm.
decide which things to do now, later, and never. So,
Mhm.
I, as you know, I've written books about all of these things, and my
Yes.
Modern Management Made Easy books are all about how do we work as effective managers, where we delegate problems and outcomes to a team. How do we support the team in offering each other feedback and coaching? Because if you can take the manager out of the middle the team's work, the team can be more effective. Often the team is much faster. So it's not so much that managers have no place, because managers create the environment, the culture in which people can do their best work. But if we have managers in the middle of the work, that's when we are not using our management capabilities to their best effect. We are interrupting people, we are micromanaging, and we're probably not making the decisions we really need to make.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I wrote down a bunch of things that you mentioned. And so before going into this conversation with you, I always, especially if I haven't spoken to the person before, I always like to watch some of their videos. And fortunately, there's a ton of presentations from you out there to get a sense of what their voice is like and how they speak and all of that. And I came across a presentation that I think you gave 2 years ago. And it started with why you still need management, because you mentioned, right, pragmatic management is not theory X management, it is theory Y management. Now, when you speak to a lot of people, I don't know whether it's a majority or not, but a lot of people that I've met in the agile community, obviously they believe in theory Y, right, that people are like motivated and they want to do good work. But the conclusion that many of them get to is, if we believe that people want to do good work and they're intrinsically motivated, then why would we need management at all? And you break it down in that one presentation by starting off like how you define what management actually is, if I'm not mistaken. Would you walk us through that? Because I think that's like a super interesting perspective to share, despite having the assumption or believing in theory Y, but also still seeing a value in management.
So I don't remember exactly which presentation that was, but when I think about management and the good that they can do in the organization, it's all about how do we remove impediments? How do we first identify impediments and then remove them? And let me just give you a little story about when I was a project manager. I know in the Agile community, project managers have a very bad name, but I was always a
Very bad name.
facilitator. Yeah. I was always a facilitative project manager. And now we would call that person an Agile project manager, because I ask people, what prevents you from doing your work? What other kinds of things as a team do you need to have so you can succeed? And I always ask the team, we are headed towards this milestone. What do you think? What do you think about this? Do you think we will make it? Do you think we won't? I never ever asked people where they were on their work, because their work, in quotes, is irrelevant. It's all about the team's work. So, and then that particular project, I used to call myself the wall around the team, because they had managers from all over the organization. Can you just do this little thing for me over here? Can you just do a little bit of thing over there for me over here? Right? Can you just? And I finally said to these people, I was a consultant at the time. I finally said to everybody, look, you get a request from anybody, you send them to me. You say, Johanna told me I cannot talk to you. Use my name, right? I am the wall around the team. I support you. I protect you. That allows you to do your work. And so the very first day after that, I got 5 or 6 calls from irate managers. You're telling my people they can't talk to me? And I said, yes, because you're interrupting them. You're not allowing them to finish the work that you brought me in here to do. If this project is so important, they need to stop multitasking. They need to do the work you want them to do. And if you ask them to multitask, they will never finish this work. So if you want me to stay here, I have imposed a restriction on the team that says if the manager calls you and wants you to do other things, you tell them to call Johanna, and I will take care of it. Back then, we did not have product leadership the way we did now, so I kept a ranked backlog of everything the team needed to do. And if they had production support, I would actually ask people, can it wait until the team is done with this next feature, which will be in a couple of days? I was not smart enough then to have one-day stories, although I did have this notion of inch pebbles, which were 1 to 2 day tasks that were either done or not done. But they were not always finished stories. They were finished tasks. So I used a lot of what we think of now as agile thinking and agile approaches, and I protected my team. If project managers had done that, we would not have such a negative feeling about the term project manager. Remember, project manager is about the project, not the people.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, it's very similar with a Scrum Master, right? A Scrum Master is a master of Scrum, not a master of the team. That's one of the first things that I learned when I embarked on this journey. But unfortunately, a lot of people like get it the other way around. Now, what I like a lot, Joanna, and thanks for walking us through this in such detail, is the emphasis on being a facilitative project manager. This is also very similar the way you described it of what a servant leader would do. Now, the story you shared, the case you shared is from the time when you were a consultant, right? And you mentioned for the past 30 years, you've been consulting organizations of on all of these topics around product development or organizational development probably as well. Now, I want to see in the realm of this pragmatic manager, other than how we deliver products, what else do you believe is, because you mentioned the leaders create the culture and by that the environment for others to succeed. What do you mean by that, creating the culture?
So this all goes back to the senior leadership integrity, for lack of a better word. So when senior leadership says one thing, but they do another thing, everybody sees that. So when they say people are our greatest asset, and then they lay a bunch of people off, we know what to believe. We know that people are not our greatest asset. In fact, too often, the senior leadership pay structure is their greatest asset. So that's, we can see K1s, we can see all of the financial reports that our companies have to do. If you are willing to do a little bit of research, you can discover many, many very interesting things about the company that you work for. And you can tell what's motivating the top management, because they will make decisions based on what motivates them. And way too often, it's about getting a very large payday at the end of their term here, not about doing a great job for the customers or a great job by the employees. And when senior leaders do that, when they have a lack of integrity, it does not matter at all what the product is. It does not matter anything about the company, because that company is on a downward spiral. It might take a long time, but that company will not succeed. And, I think one of the good things about longevity as a consultant is I can see these things. I can see the early patterns, and I can, if senior leadership or even middle management wants to make a difference, right? How can we change? I can help them with that. I can support them through that. But too often they think, I can get away with this for a little while. And that's the problem. Because if somebody at the top starts to get away with it, somebody in the middle starts to get away with it, and it permeates down. So the issue of culture, what we reward, how we work together, and how we treat each other, all those things. That's what people see every single day, and all those stupid sayings on the walls. Yeah, that's look for the Dilberts, not the framed pictures.
Yeah, it's so good. When I became a dad 10 years ago, I frequently reach out to my parents for parental advice. Obviously, they had gone through this, and I believe they did a good job on me. So I remember my mom telling me, like, your kids won't do what you say, they will do what you do. And this say do gap, a few weeks ago, David Bland framed it really well. This is, I think, the same thing that happens in organizations. It's very similar to what you were just sharing, right? It's not about what the leaders say. Everybody can say our people are our greatest assets, but what you do, right? What do you do when it gets difficult, when the profits are down? Are you going to stick with the people because they are your greatest asset, or are you going to lay them off? And then people are going to judge you based on the actions, not based on what you said earlier. Now, I haven't been in consulting as long as you have, right? Also, I think I also have white hair, not as much. Now, what I can also attest is once you are in that job for a while, you do see these patterns and anti patterns. And I was wondering, Johanna, if you could share with us some of those patterns that result in an organization being able to really innovate, build great products, great business models, etc., and anti patterns that keep organizations from doing that.
So let me talk first about the pattern that I see of innovation, and that's where senior leaders take risks. They experiment. They might time box their experiments, right? We're not going to go open loop for an entire year, but we're going to give this a shot. We're going to give this a try. We will measure our successes, hopefully, or our failures, but we will not stop this experiment until we have the data. And I think that's a lot of senior leaders find that very, very challenging. They did not get to senior leadership because they were so good at experimenting.
Mm-hmm.
That might have been part of what propelled them there. But a lot of senior leaders got to where they were by having plans, executing to the plan, all that stuff. And that's the anti-pattern I see. So many of my clients have they try and have a year-long project portfolio. I'm a one-person company. I have a plan for the year, but it's my strategy, my goal, my overarching goal where I want to get to. It's not what I commit to doing. My committing is much more based on anywhere from a week to a month-long boundary. And I don't have as many other consultants. I cannot predict month to month what my income will be, my revenue will be, but I can pretty much predict on a yearly basis, as long as I keep innovating, as long as I really recreate my strategy by the work I do, I can commit to having about that much money every year in some way, shape, or form, right? Mm-hmm. I cannot predict what will bring me revenue, but I can predict roughly the revenue. And if I'm not making it, right, if I realize a month or two has gone by and I'm not making my revenue, I can change. This is exactly what companies need to do. Strategy is not the thing you go to a retreat and plan for sitting down with a whole bunch of flip chart paper. Strategy is something you live every single day. And so the longer your product roadmaps, the longer your project portfolio, the less flexibility you have to innovate and experiment. And that totally can prevent a company from making their revenue. And if they can experiment, now they have a shot of really increasing their revenue.
Yeah. So you mentioned like the number one pattern towards innovation being senior leader taking risks. Now, a lot of senior leaders, depending on the size of the organization, obviously, are not so much in the day to day, right? So they probably wouldn't be building products. What are a few examples that you can give on how senior leaders could take risks and make it transparent to the organization that they are taking risks so that other people see that they're role modeling the behavior, which will result in hopefully more innovation throughout the organization?
So, one way is for senior leadership to give a little insight to the rest of the organization on the discussions in the senior leadership team meetings. So, one thing we all hear about the senior leadership team, and then we all hear about product development teams. And those people in the middle management, they need cohorts and teams also. But what are the discussions in the senior leadership team about experiments that then middle management and those first line teams can support? What are the overarching goals we will experiment with this quarter? A lot of people are doing OKRs. To me, they look like MBOs dressed up as OKRs. So I really mean an overarching goal for the organization. And then how do I, as whatever it is I am in the organization, how do I contribute up to that overarching goal? I never want to see overarching goals cascading down. That's MBOs again and again, and not what Drucker actually wanted. Instead, how can I, as a team, as an individual, as a team member, as part of the middle management team, contribute up to the OKR, to that overarching goal? Right? As long as we are always optimizing up for our experiments, up for our goals, that's what really matters. And that might mean that a senior leadership team might say, we are considering experimenting with our products to open up this kind of a customer base that we have not seen before. That's our overarching goal for this quarter, this month, this year, whatever it is. We will do 3 things to work on that overarching goal. And now if you have some transparency in the rest of the organization, now we can see their experiments and their willingness to take risks. And when they decide to stop that experiment,
Yeah.
right? Stopping experiments is also really important. And if senior leadership does not say when to start and when to stop, how will the rest of us know?
Yeah, especially. So I was just going to go there, right? It's not only saying we're going to run an experiment; it's also having that feedback loop, which you mentioned earlier. Because without that feedback loop, I mean, we can develop all we want incrementally. If we don't do it iteratively, we're not learning, right? Or at least not as much as we could. Now, that feedback loop is also, I think, something that senior leaders need to role model because that demonstrates to the rest of the organization we acknowledge that we're acting based on assumptions, and
Mm-hmm.
assumptions need to be tested. So we have a hypothesis, we run an experiment, we have that feedback loop, and we decide based on the data or the metrics or whatever we are looking at whether we continue that experiment, whether we slightly change that experiment, whether we pivot strongly or whether we stop, right? And I think like demonstrating that to the organization. And thank you for the example that you provided with going for new customer groups, like new countries that you want to enter, building a completely new offering, right? How to set up your project or product portfolio, starting with different budgeting, right? All of these kind of things could be experiments that senior leaders lead. Now, what are other patterns? Because you wanted to start with a few. What are other patterns that you see in organizations that really result in an organization that is fostering innovation and anti-patterns in organizations? So we have the piece of taking risks, where there's having those 5-year plans. What else is out there?
So I see empathizing with the people that do the work as part of fostering innovation. And for me, a lot of that is getting rid of all the bureaucracy. I mean,
Mhm.
I realize some of the bureaucracy is there for to keep the company out of court. A lot of HR bureaucracy is about keeping the company out of court, right? HR offers very little strategic value. Um, Certainly not for hiring. Most of the time, that's all about keeping the company out of court. But all the stuff about career ladders and when we can when we can actually promote somebody and how much money we can give them, all of that is CYA, cover your tush, right? Very little of that enhances the ability of the organization to actually get stuff done. The career ladder stuff is really, I think, a huge problem. I wrote a series last year about career ladders, and I have a couple of presentations about it. I need to do a little book on how to do an agile career ladder, because the more we work on flow efficiency thinking,
Mhm.
the more we reduce the delays. The more we reduce the delays, the faster we recognize revenue, product and support revenue. That means the cost of a person is almost immaterial. Because if we reduce the delays in the organization, we recognize revenue so much faster. We become almost a money making machine. However, the more we have all these kind of crazy career ladders where we only can promote people once a year, we can only give them X%. So they almost have to go some other place to get more money. We are losing all of that depth of knowledge
Yeah.
and the ability of the team that they were in to actually collaborate and do good work. So instead, that's an anti-pattern I see. Instead, the pattern that makes a whole lot more sense is how to create collaborative teams across the organization, how to reward people for coaching and leading other people who are also, quote, individual contributors, right? That the mark of a senior leader in the technical space is how well that person coaches other people to do what that senior technical person can do. Not to optimize for individuals, but to optimize for collaboration.
Yeah. Now let's dive into this final point that you mentioned, right? The point of the senior leader is to coach the people that are, let's say, more junior, to be able to do what the senior individual contributor, senior IC, is doing. How do you define coaching?
Oh, I use the McClendon nine box thing. I have a reference to it in the Modern Management Made Easy books. Oh, and also in the consulting book. It's not it's facilitating other people to learn. Sometimes that's teaching. Sometimes that's coaching. Sometimes that's modeling, and then you do it. Right. So there's 9 various potential boxes, and the more we can support other people doing the work and either reporting back to us or getting some other kind of type feedback loop, the more that senior leader is able to coach other people
Yeah.
successfully.
Yeah, and I think it's very important what you just mentioned. And the reason I asked, how do you find coaching, is because what I see happening, I don't know if it's the same in the US, but it's a lot in Europe, that a lot of people think, okay, now a leader needs to become a coach. And being a coach means you primarily only ask questions because you
Oh,
operate under the assumption that the person in front of you has all the answers. Now, my background is in medicine, right? I studied medicine, I worked in hospitals, and I'm like, even if someone like me goes successfully through med school, graduates top of their class, you can't assume that that person can do the surgery, right? So we have this see one, do one, teach one principle of how attending physicians help young doctors build up the skill and then ultimately take on more and more and more responsibility. And I believe, now I've been in the world of business for 15 plus years, that it's very similar. Because when I look at software engineers, when I look at people working in the like marketing department, sales, when they come out of university and join these companies, they really don't know how to do the job, right? Rarely do I see a software engineer be able to write clean code, right? Do test driven development and all of these good practices. Now we can debate a lot about like what is actual clean code, but they just don't know because nobody has taught them. And I believe, and I was wondering, like you've been in this space since 1977, right? How do you look at the role of the leader? And when you'd say coaching, to what extent does that also include the teaching piece, the modeling piece, the supporting piece, the removing impediments piece, all of those things?
oh, so I had a coach once for 5 minutes. I was really stuck on something in my organization. Um, I went to my VP. I said, "Here are my questions." My VP said, "I really don't know. Let me get you a coach." Okay, fine. So the next day, a coach appeared, and I asked my coach these questions, and she said, "The answers are all inside of you." I said, "Well, I'm not able to access them. I believe there are real answers here, and I don't know. So let me ask you again, because I really need some answers." And then she said, "The answers are all inside of you." I said, "No, they're not. They're outside of me. This is before we had the internet, right? So I read books, but yeah." So I asked her again, and she said, um, "Maybe it's your relationship with your parents."
Oh
And I
man.
said, "Thank you very much. I don't need life coaching, and if you don't have answers, you're fired. I'm just done." So I reached out to some of my, we had email at this time. I reached out to some of my other colleagues, and I said, without giving you all the particulars, I'm having trouble with these kinds of problems. Do you know of any books I should read? This is actually the beginning of my project portfolio um, information gathering, because my boss just kept saying, "Do all this, do this and this and this and this," and we could not succeed. And I also had a couple of problem quotes employees, because by this time my boss had figured that if there was a quote problem employee, end of quote, I couldn't manage them. But I didn't feel as if I was successful. So I actually asked for help, and that was the last I used a coach. So no, I coaching, to me, coaching is a lot what Esther and I wrote in Behind Closed Doors, Secrets of Great Management. We see the signals of a problem, but we now need to understand the real context of the problem and go below to dive deep below the signals and to understand all of the possible interconnecting problems. In the consulting book, Successful Independent Consulting, I have a whole chapter mentioning the critical thinking skills that consultants need. And I'm actually wondering if I should do a little book for consultants and managers to help them realize, here's how you do force field analysis. Here's how you do circles of influence. Here's how you do concentric circles. Here's how you ask questions based on the signals that you see to find the real patterns underneath. Because I see way too much coaching of agile techniques like time boxes or refinement meetings. Though, yes, you might need to teach something about that, but that's not the point. That's not effective management. It's not effective product development. So how do we find the real issues underneath the signals that we see?
That was definitely a fun story. Thank you for that, and a lot of things to dive deeper on. Now, when I look at what you described, what a modern or pragmatic. So, by the way, you sometimes use pragmatic manager. But your book is titled Modern Manager. What is the difference, Johanna, if I might ask?
So I started to write my email newsletter, The Pragmatic Manager, before
Yes.
I distributed any books with the Pragmatic Bookshelf. And I wanted them to distribute the Modern Management Made Easy books. And I was afraid that if I titled them Pragmatic Management, that they would not distribute them. They have this thing about the word pragmatic. It's fine. It's
Okay.
and pragmatic management did not rank high on the title analyzers. So for SEO considerations and for working with the prags, I titled them those three books: Modern Management Made Easy, Practical Ways to Manage Yourself, Practical Ways to Lead and Serve Others, Practical Ways to Lead an Innovative Organization.
Okay. Okay. But your newsletter, I saw that is under the title Pragmatic Manager. But so there
Yeah,
is like content wise, there's no difference other than like the title itself.
right,
No.
right. I'm
And
still
now when
me.
I yeah. Now when I look at how you describe this modern manager or the pragmatic manager, and I think you and I are very much in line in terms of what we want to see managers within organizations do. But when I compare that with most managers that I currently see in organizations, there's a huge gap. Now, how do you help these managers to bridge that gap?
So it really depends what they want. I mean, as a consultant, I offer several services, which is coaching, consulting, and trusted advisor. And I'm really working with my potential clients to try and use me more as a trusted advisor, the more senior they are in the organization. Because as a trusted advisor, they can ask me any question at any time. We are not bound by our outcomes and
Hmm.
I by predefined outcomes. And I find that that's a more effective way to use me and more effective for them to think about their expertise and where they are in the organization. So I am and to be honest, the fees are not that much higher because it's work I really want to do, and um, I'm very effective in that role. So being a trusted advisor, where they come to me with questions, we go back and forth on how to how to best use, in the best sense, use their organization, use their power, use their people, their in quotes, right, the people they lead and serve, to make more effective products that customers want to buy. I mean, the outcomes are always, how do we attract more customers? How do we get more revenue? How do we have a better organization? And if we start to think like that, then I can really use everything I've seen as patterns and anti-patterns to really support their changes and their growth.
Yeah. Now, when we talk concretely about these changes, um, where do you start? Do you start with the individual leader? Do you start with looking at how units are like structured, moving, for example, from silo teams to cross-functional teams? Do you start with working with on a pilot product? Where do you start when you want to help these organizations as a whole? And you mentioned flow efficiency several times. Where do you start for helping those organizations become more effective?
So almost always people come to me because they are multitasking and it's too hard to get anything done. And they come to me because of the project portfolio book, right? So manage your project portfolio, increase your capacity, and finish more projects. So that's when I say to them, if you really want to manage the project portfolio, you need to commit to a team, not a group of individuals. And
Mhm.
you commit one project to a team at a time. And I find the notion of project as container very helpful, right? As soon
Mhm.
as you have more products than you have teams, we need to sequence the work. So I use project as a container. And then, so I work with these leaders to say, how do you currently make decisions now about the project portfolio? Too often it's a HEPO, highest paid person's opinion. Sometimes it's all this ROI nonsense, which makes no sense at all. So we talk about cost of delay and maybe the oldest thing that's still hanging around. And then
Mhm.
we talk about how to make decisions. And I often find that between how to make decisions and the aging and cost of delay, that if I can support one person into gathering a cohort of colleagues, that starts the change. I don't need to talk about flow efficiency thinking. I talk about decision making and how to make more effective decisions.
Yes.
And that allows me to talk about collaboration. So, I mean, I have really tried to support several organizations through their agile transformation. And when I do that, I start with a product line. But I find that there are so many other interconnected pieces that prevent product line transformation. That if I start with one person and say, who's your cohort? How do you make decisions? We are much more likely to have a positive outcome. And I think the other problem is people expect a transformation in 3 or 4 months. We are talking about changing years and years and years of culture. That 3 or 4 months is almost overnight. That's just nuts. So don't think that way. Think about, how do we create baby steps towards a culture change?
Yeah. What is, I always tell to my clients, what is the valid next step that you can take? Because they
Yeah.
come, they've seen some beautiful slides done by one of the big consultancies, like that's what we want to be. And it's very, and sometimes, I mean, they even take screenshots from Henry Knieberg's video about the Spotify model. They don't even go and like make those visuals nicer. I mean, Henrik's visuals are nice, but you immediately recognize them. I'm like, so that's your valid next step from where you are today. They're like, I'm like, no, that's not your next step, right? We need to find
Yeah.
something that is actually doable, because when I think about change, and one of the concepts that I don't see be covered enough, and I don't have data behind it, but that's my observation, is building momentum is incredibly important, right? People, and we see that in sports a lot. Like if you look at a playoff season, and suddenly one team is 2 games down, but then they start winning one game, winning the second one. Like having momentum on your side can really do a lot of magic in an organization, in sports, and likewise in organizations. And I believe if you think about that valid next step and you succeed taking it, you build momentum. Then you think about the next step, right? And then you succeed with that again. Now, when you talk about it takes years of changing, it's also related to, and you mentioned decision making earlier, to how leaders show up, right? How they act, what they prioritize, how they whether they teach or not, right? How much time they spend on that. In my agile leadership courses at the very beginning, I ask people, what percentage of your time do you currently spend helping your direct reports become better at the job they do? And the number is usually somewhere between 0 and 10 to 15%, right? That's the reality that I see in many organizations. Now, fortunately, throughout the course, they realize, oh man, the biggest lever that I have is actually enabling the people do their work better. And as part of that, become better decision makers, right? Because they need to take a lot of decisions. You mentioned strategy is something that you do on a daily basis. That's all taking decisions. Now, how do you help leaders build these skills? Because many of them were promoted in a position of leadership without having these skills.
So, I believe in practical ways to lead and serve others, and in my leadership workshops, I ask people to fill out a little spreadsheet of where they spend their time every week, and then contrast that to where they want to spend their time. And I often discover, as I'm sure that you do, that they spend their time individually with people on little tiny things, not on supporting the entire team, not on working across the organization. And when I ask them to compare with what they want to do, right, all that working across the organization, working for a higher goal, all that stuff is where they want to be. And then I ask them to build 3 steps themselves to what they would have to do to change where they spend their time. Because this is the say-do gap, right? Where if people say, I want a collaborative organization, but they're still down in the code, down in the projects, down in everything, right? The micromanagement filters down from the very top. So if you think about micromanagement and delegation, what would you have to do to delegate successfully so you don't have to be involved in the minutiae of the work? And that's often, I either need to arrange for training, I need to do some training, I need to do some kind of support for the team so they know how to collaborate. I mean, it's all these things. So the first thing I do with these leaders is I ask them to watch their time for a week and fill out the spreadsheet. And then they say, oh no, oh, I'm in trouble. Well, now you see the trouble. You were in trouble before, but now you see it. You have data. Now you can do something about it.
Now I can do something about it. Yeah. And I think, I mean, you mentioned earlier like refinements and all of these things. I think one of the most valuable things that these events, for example, in Scrum bring is that you make time for a feedback loop, that you make time for prioritization, that you make time for synchronization, that you make time for continuous improvement, right? And when I teach my courses on Scrum, I always say, don't follow the framework because you just want to follow the framework. Do it because it helps you build new habits, right? And then once you build those habits, once you are okay with getting feedback constantly from the right people, right? Building your product in small increments, the small batch sizes that you were referring to and all this, then just explore what else you can do, right? Move beyond the framework. But from where you are today, you first need to build these habits. And once you got that, then you're off to the races, right? So yeah, so this is interesting, Joanna. I will definitely subscribe to your newsletter. And if you're okay, once we finish the post production of this, we will also link your newsletter to this video so that people can find it easily and subscribe. I think you publish on a monthly, weekly, bi weekly basis.
Monthly for the newsletter. Yeah.
On a monthly basis. And if I remember correctly, I looked at the website. You also have an archive of previously published articles,
Oh,
which is
yes.
great to see,
Yes.
right? So people don't miss out. If they find it interesting, and I went through some of those articles, you also beautifully link between those articles so you can easily jump from one topic to the next topic to the next topic. Now, where else, looking at the time, we're almost at the end of our time box. Where else can people find you? Where else can people learn from you?
So everything starts off at my website, jrothman.com, JROTHMAN.com. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Mastodon, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook. I'm in lots of places. But if you start off with jrothman.com, and especially to read some of my writing, I think that's the right place.
That's the right place. So, Joanna, I could go on for another hour easily. Thank you so much for joining. I would probably reach out to you again for another conversation if you're up for it.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Yeah. All right, everyone. So our next conversation will be with Jim Highsmith, and I hope to see many of you then. Bye.